Money can't buy miracles. Leonard Whitmore learned this truth the day his world shattered into a million pieces on a rain-soaked highway. In his $20 million Atlanta mansion, silence had replaced the sound of running footsteps and childhood laughter. Where once his son Nathan had filled every room with energy and joy, now only the steady hum of medical equipment marked the passage of empty days. The accident had stolen more than just movement. It had taken the light from a child's eyes and the hope from a father's heart. Specialists came with their degrees and their careful words, but their expensive consultations all delivered the same crushing verdict: some damage cannot be undone. Leonard had built his empire on control, commanding every aspect of his perfectly ordered world. But now, watching his son exist in a twilight between living and merely surviving, control had become his cruelest enemy. Because there are some things that all the money in the world cannot command back to life. The mansion that once hosted Georgia's elite now felt like a tomb. Nurses moved like shadows through corridors where a boy's dreams had once soared. Doctors visited with their clipboards and sympathetic expressions, each appointment driving another stake through the heart of possibility. But sometimes, in the darkest places, hope refuses to surrender. Sometimes, healing arrives in the most unexpected form. And sometimes, the miracle you've stopped believing in walks through your door carrying nothing but faith and an unshakable belief in the impossible. Leonard didn't know it yet, but his world of marble and crystal was about to be transformed by someone who would see what everyone else had missed. Someone who would prove that the most powerful medicine isn't found in any hospital. It lives in the courage to believe when belief seems foolish. In a house where hope had gone to die, something extraordinary was about to unfold. The question wasn't whether miracles existed. The question was whether a broken father would recognize one when it arrived singing softly in his kitchen. Subscribe to the channel for more incredible stories of hope and healing, and don't forget to like the video if you believe love can conquer anything. Hit the bell to witness the miracle that changed everything. The grandfather clock in the marble foyer of the Whitmore mansion struck 6 a.m., its deep chimes echoing through empty corridors that once rang with the sound of a child's laughter. Leonard Whitmore stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his study, watching the Atlanta sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and pink, but seeing none of its beauty. In his perfectly tailored charcoal suit, he looked like a man ready to conquer the world, but his eyes told a different story. They were the eyes of someone who had already lost the only battle that mattered. 8 months. It had been 8 months since the accident that changed everything. 8 months since 17-year-old Nathan had been racing home from basketball practice in the rain, eager to tell his father about making varsity. 8 months since a drunk driver had run a red light and turned Leonard's world into a nightmare of sterile hospital rooms and whispered medical consultations. Mr. Whitmore, the voice belonged to Mrs. Henderson, his longtime housekeeper, a woman in her 60s who had worked for the family since Nathan was born. The new cook is here for her interview. Shall I show her to the kitchen? Leonard didn't turn from the window. Handle it yourself, Mrs. Henderson. I don't have time for kitchen staff interviews. Sir, you've rejected the last 4 cooks without even meeting them. Nathan needs proper nutrition, and I can't manage both the household and— Nathan doesn't eat. The words came out harsher than Leonard intended. Nathan doesn't do anything. Nathan just exists. Mrs. Henderson's face softened with the kind of pity that Leonard had learned to hate. Mr. Whitmore, the doctors said. The doctors said a lot of things. Leonard finally turned from the window, his face a mask of controlled anger. They said he might never walk again. They said he might never speak again. They said we should consider long-term care facilities. What they didn't say was how to watch your only child disappear in front of your eyes. The accident had left Nathan paralyzed from the neck down, but Leonard knew the real damage went much deeper. His son, the boy who had once climbed every tree on their 10-acre estate, who had dreamed of playing professional basketball, who had filled every room with his infectious enthusiasm, had simply stopped trying, stopped talking, stopped eating unless forced, stopped showing any interest in the world around him. Perhaps this cook will be different, Mrs. Henderson said gently. She has experience with special needs. They all have experience. They all have recommendations. They all fail. Leonard straightened his tie and picked up his briefcase. I have meetings all day. Handle the interview, make your decision, and just keep her out of my way. As Leonard headed toward the front door, he passed the elevator that had been installed to take Nathan between floors. The house had been transformed with ramps, specialized equipment, and medical supplies, all the trappings of a life reduced to mere survival, but none of it had brought back the son he'd lost. In the kitchen, Mrs. Henderson was reviewing the application of Alyssa Johnson, a 28-year-old woman from the West End of Atlanta. The photo showed a young black woman with kind eyes and a warm smile, but Leonard had learned not to trust appearances. Kindness didn't cure paralysis, and warm smiles didn't bring back lost dreams. Nathan's room was on the ground floor now, what used to be Leonard's home office converted into a medical facility that rivaled some hospital rooms. Machines monitored his vital signs, a hospital bed dominated the space, and physical therapy equipment sat unused in the corner. Nathan lay propped up on pillows, staring at the ceiling with the same blank expression he'd worn for months. "Good morning, Nathan," said Rebecca, the day nurse, a competent woman in her 40s who treated Nathan with professional efficiency but little warmth. "Time for your morning medications." Nathan didn't respond. He never responded anymore, except occasionally to blink or move his eyes when directly addressed. The doctors called it selective engagement, a psychological withdrawal that often accompanied severe trauma. Leonard called it giving up. Dr. Reeves, Nathan's neurologist, had been clear about the prognosis. While Nathan retained some sensation and limited movement in his arms and hands, full recovery was unlikely. But the bigger concern wasn't physical. It was Nathan's complete disengagement from life itself. "He needs stimulation," Dr. Reeves had said during their last consultation. "Music therapy, social interaction, activities that engage his mind and emotions. The body can heal, Mr. Whitmore, but only if the spirit wants to heal too." Leonard had hired music therapists, art therapists, and psychologists. Nathan remained indifferent to all of them. The boy who once filled every conversation with excitement about his future now seemed to have no interest in having a future at all. Meanwhile, downstairs in the kitchen, Alyssa Johnson was being interviewed by Mrs. Henderson. Unlike the previous candidates who had focused on their culinary credentials and experience with dietary restrictions, Alyssa seemed more interested in learning about Nathan himself. "How old is he?" she asked, her voice carrying a slight southern accent that spoke of Georgia roots. 17. He was a senior in high school when the accident happened. Very active, very social, he was. Mrs. Henderson paused, choosing her words carefully. "He was the light of this house. And now?" Mrs. Henderson sighed. "Now he doesn't speak, barely eats. The doctors say he's physically capable of more than he's doing, but he just won't try." Alyssa nodded thoughtfully. Sometimes people need a reason to try again. Sometimes they just need someone to believe they can. There was something in her tone that made Mrs. Henderson look up from the application. "You sound like you speak from experience." "I do. I have a younger brother who was born with cerebral palsy. Doctors said a lot of things about what he'd never be able to do. But my mama always said that healing isn't just medical, it's spiritual too. Sometimes the medicine that works isn't in a pill bottle." Mrs. Henderson studied this young woman who spoke with such quiet confidence about things that highly trained specialists had failed to accomplish. "The position pays well, but it's demanding. Mr. Whitmore is difficult since the accident. He's angry, controlling, and he doesn't tolerate failure. Grief makes people hard," Alyssa said simply. "Doesn't make them bad. You'd be responsible for all meal preparation, including Nathan's dietary needs. He requires pureed foods, careful attention to nutrition, and..." Mrs. Henderson hesitated. "He usually refuses to eat unless forced. Maybe he just hasn't found anything worth eating for yet." There was something about Alyssa's response that struck Mrs. Henderson as different from all the other candidates. Where others had focused on techniques and procedures, Alyssa seemed to understand that feeding someone was about more than just nutrition. "When can you start?" Mrs. Henderson asked, making a decision that would change everything in the Whitmore house. "Tomorrow, if you need me to." As Alyssa left the mansion, she paused in the circular driveway to look back at the imposing structure. It was beautiful in the way that money could make things beautiful. Perfectly landscaped, architecturally stunning, every detail precisely maintained. But there was something cold about it too, something that spoke of a house where joy had moved out and left only obligation behind. She thought about the housekeeper's description of Nathan, this 17-year-old boy who had stopped trying to live. In her experience, people didn't give up because they couldn't fight anymore. They gave up because they couldn't remember what they were fighting for. That evening, Leonard returned to a house that felt exactly as lifeless as when he'd left it. He poured himself a scotch in his study and reviewed the day's business deals, but his mind kept wandering to the room down the hall where his son lay staring at nothing. He'd tried everything, the best doctors, the most advanced treatments, specialists from around the world. Nothing had worked. Nathan remained trapped not just in his damaged body, but in a prison of his own making, one that no amount of money or medical intervention seemed able to unlock. Leonard finished his drink and walked to Nathan's room. The boy was awake, as he often was late at night, just lying there with that same empty expression that had become as familiar as it was heartbreaking. "The new cook starts tomorrow," Leonard said, though he didn't expect a response. "Mrs. Henderson seems to think she might be different." Nathan's eyes flickered toward his father for just a moment before returning to the ceiling. It was the most acknowledgement Leonard had received in weeks. "I know you're in there," Leonard whispered, his voice breaking slightly. "I know my son is still in there somewhere. I just don't know how to reach you anymore." He stood there for several more minutes, hoping for some sign, some indication that Nathan was still fighting. But there was nothing, just the steady rhythm of the monitoring equipment and the sound of his own heart breaking a little more each day. Leonard had built his fortune by solving problems, by finding ways around every obstacle and challenge. But this problem, how to save a son who didn't want to be saved, seemed impossible even for him. As he turned to leave, he didn't notice the single tear that rolled down Nathan's cheek, the first emotion the boy had shown in months. Because sometimes, the people we love most are also the ones we're least able to help. And sometimes, healing requires a completely different kind of intervention. Tomorrow, everything would change. But neither Leonard nor Nathan could have imagined that the catalyst for that change would arrive carrying grocery bags and humming gospel songs in their kitchen. Sometimes miracles come disguised as ordinary people doing extraordinary things. And sometimes, the answer to our deepest prayers walks through the door when we've stopped believing that anyone is listening to our cries for help. Alyssa Johnson arrived at the Whitmore mansion at 6 a.m. sharp, carrying a worn canvas bag and wearing a simple blue dress that had seen better days but was clean and pressed. Mrs. Henderson met her at the service entrance, noting how the young woman's eyes immediately went to the kitchen windows that overlooked the gardens. "Beautiful view," Alyssa said softly. "Must be nice to watch the seasons change while you're cooking." Mrs. Henderson smiled. It had been a long time since anyone in this house had noticed anything beautiful. "Let me show you around the kitchen and explain Nathan's dietary requirements." The kitchen was a chef's dream: granite countertops, professional-grade appliances, and enough space to prepare meals for 50 people. But despite its grandeur, it felt cold and unused, more like a showpiece than the heart of a home. "Nathan's meals need to be pureed or very soft," Mrs. Henderson explained, opening a cabinet filled with medical nutrition supplements. "He has difficulty swallowing since the accident." The nutritionist left specific guidelines about calories and protein requirements. Alyssa nodded, studying the lengthy list of dietary restrictions and medical considerations. "What about what he likes to eat? What were his favorite foods before?" Mrs. Henderson paused, surprised by the question. "He loved my chocolate chip cookies, and his mother used to make him banana pancakes on Sunday mornings before she..." She stopped, realizing she was sharing more than intended. "Before she what?" Alyssa asked gently. "Before she died. Cancer, when Nathan was 12. It's been just him and his father since then." Alyssa absorbed this information quietly. A boy who'd lost his mother and now felt like he was losing everything else. No wonder he'd given up hope. "Where is Nathan now?" she asked. "In his room. But you should know, he doesn't respond to people anymore. Don't take it personally." Alyssa finished reviewing the nutritional guidelines and washed her hands. "Mrs. Henderson, would it be all right if I introduced myself to Nathan? I like to know who I'm cooking for." Mrs. Henderson hesitated. Leonard had been clear about keeping staff interactions with Nathan professional and minimal, but there was something about Alyssa that made her want to bend the rules. "5 minutes," she said, "but don't expect him to acknowledge you." Nathan's room was dimly lit, with heavy curtains blocking most of the morning sunlight. The 17-year-old lay propped up in his hospital bed, staring at a muted television that flickered with the morning news. He didn't look toward the door when Alyssa entered. "Hi, Nathan," she said softly, positioning herself where he could see her if he chose to look. "I'm Alyssa. I'm going to be cooking for you and your daddy." No response. Nathan's eyes remained fixed on the television screen. "I was just wondering what kind of foods you like. I know you probably don't have much appetite right now, but I was thinking maybe we could start with something that tastes like home." Still nothing, but Alyssa noticed that Nathan's breathing had changed slightly, becoming less rhythmic. He was listening, even if he wasn't responding. "You know, my little brother Marcus has some challenges too, different than yours, but he went through a time when food just didn't seem important. But my mama always said that food is love you can taste. Maybe we can find something that reminds you why eating is worth the effort." She moved closer to the window and pulled back one of the curtains, letting warm sunlight stream into the room. Nathan blinked at the sudden brightness but didn't protest. "That's better," Alyssa said. "Hard to have an appetite when you're sitting in the dark all the time." For just a moment, Nathan's eyes flickered toward her face before returning to the television. It was brief, but Alyssa caught it. "I'll let you rest now," she said, "but I'm going to make you something special for lunch, something that might surprise you." Back in the kitchen, Alyssa began her first day by doing something no previous cook had done. She started singing. Not loudly, just soft gospel melodies that her grandmother had taught her, songs that spoke of hope and healing and the power of faith to overcome any obstacle. Mrs. Henderson was initially concerned about the singing, knowing how Leonard felt about any unnecessary noise in the house. But there was something soothing about Alyssa's voice, something that seemed to bring warmth to the cold marble corridors. For Nathan's lunch, instead of following the standard pureed meal plan, Alyssa decided to make something that would engage his senses. She prepared a smooth butternut squash soup with hints of cinnamon and nutmeg, filling the kitchen with aromas that carried memories of comfort and care. Alongside it, she made fresh dinner rolls that she could break into small, soft pieces. When she brought the tray to Nathan's room, she found him in the same position as before. But this time, as she entered, she noticed his nostrils flare slightly. He was smelling the food. "I made you some soup," she said, setting the tray on his bedside table. "It's got butternut squash, which is naturally sweet, and I added just a touch of spices that my grandmother used to put in everything." Rebecca, the day nurse, prepared to assist with feeding, but Alyssa held up her hand gently. "Nathan, would it be okay if I helped you with lunch today? I promise I'll be careful." For the first time in months, Nathan turned his head to look directly at someone. His eyes met Alyssa's, and she saw something there that everyone else had missed. Not emptiness, but sadness so deep it had been mistaken for absence. "Is that a yes?" she asked softly. Nathan blinked once, deliberately. It wasn't much, but it was communication. Alyssa pulled a chair close to his bed and carefully positioned the adjustable table. "This soup has been simmering all morning, just waiting for someone to appreciate it. My grandmother always said that food tastes better when it's made with intention." She filled the spoon with a small amount of soup and held it where Nathan could see it. "Ready?" Nathan opened his mouth slightly, the first voluntary action he'd taken during a meal in months. As the soup touched his tongue, his eyes widened with surprise. It actually tasted good, not like medicine or obligation, but like something someone had cared enough to make properly. "Good?" Alyssa asked, and Nathan blinked once again. They continued in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than Nathan had maintained with everyone else. This wasn't the silence of withdrawal, it was the silence of someone tentatively beginning to trust. After lunch, Alyssa cleaned up and returned to the kitchen, where she found Mrs. Henderson waiting with an expression of amazement. "He ate the whole bowl," the housekeeper said. "The whole bowl, Alyssa. He hasn't finished a meal in 6 months." "Sometimes people need to remember why they want to live before they can remember how to live," Alyssa replied, beginning preparations for dinner. That afternoon, Leonard returned from his meetings to find something different in the house. There was a smell, not the antiseptic odor of medical equipment, but the warm, inviting aroma of someone actually cooking. And underneath it, almost too faint to notice, was the sound of humming. He followed the sounds to the kitchen, where he found Alyssa preparing what looked like a complicated dinner, moving efficiently between multiple pots and pans while humming something that sounded like a church hymn. "You must be the new cook," Leonard said, his tone neutral but not unfriendly. Alyssa looked up from her preparations and smiled. "Yes, sir, Mr. Whitmore. I'm Alyssa Johnson. Mrs. Henderson told me you prefer not to be disturbed, but I wanted you to know that Nathan had a good lunch today." Leonard's expression sharpened. "Define good." "He ate everything I gave him, voluntarily, and he looked at me when I spoke to him." Leonard felt something stir in his chest, not quite hope, but the memory of what hope used to feel like. Nathan doesn't look at people anymore. "Maybe he just needed someone to look at him the right way," Alyssa said gently. Before Leonard could respond, Mrs. Henderson appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Mr. Whitmore, you should know that Nathan has been more alert this afternoon than I've seen him in months. When Dr. Reeves called to check on him, Nathan actually moved his head toward the phone." Leonard stared at both women, trying to process what they were telling him. After 8 months of specialists and failed treatments, was it possible that a cook who'd been in his house for less than 12 hours, had somehow reached his son? "What did you do differently?" he asked Alyssa. "I talked to him like he was still there," she said simply. "Because I believe he is." That evening, Leonard found himself doing something he hadn't done in months. He went to Nathan's room not to check on medical equipment or discuss treatment plans, but simply to see his son. Nathan was awake, which was normal, but something was different. Instead of staring blankly at the ceiling, he was looking out the window at the garden, where the setting sun was painting the sky in brilliant colors. "Good day?" Leonard asked, settling into the chair beside the bed. Nathan turned toward his father's voice, and Leonard felt his breath catch. For just a moment, he saw a flicker of the boy Nathan used to be. Not the empty shell he'd become, but the son who used to run to greet him at the door every evening. "Mrs. Henderson says you ate well today, that the new cook made you something special." Nathan's lips moved slightly, as if he were trying to form words. Leonard leaned closer, hoping, waiting. "Good," Nathan whispered, the word barely audible but unmistakably there. It was the first word Nathan had spoken in 4 months. Leonard felt tears he'd been holding back for months finally break free. "Yeah?" he managed. "It was good?" Nathan blinked once, and Leonard understood that his son was trying to communicate, trying to find his way back to the world of the living. As Leonard sat beside Nathan's bed that night, listening to his son's breathing and watching him sleep peacefully for the first time in months, he found himself thinking about the young woman in his kitchen who had somehow accomplished in one day what teams of specialists had failed to do in 8 months. He didn't understand how it was possible. He didn't understand what made Alyssa different from all the other caregivers and therapists who had tried to reach Nathan. But for the first time since the accident, Leonard allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, his son wasn't as lost as everyone thought. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities for progress or setback. But tonight, Nathan had spoken. Tonight, Nathan had chosen to engage with the world instead of hiding from it. And it had all started with a bowl of soup made by someone who believed that healing was about more than just medicine. 3 weeks had passed since Alyssa arrived at the Whitmore mansion, and the house felt different. Not dramatically transformed, but subtly warmer, like someone had opened windows that had been sealed shut for too long. Nathan was eating regularly now, speaking in short phrases, and had even smiled twice. Events that Mrs. Henderson marked on the calendar like holidays. Leonard found himself making excuses to walk past the kitchen during the day, drawn by the sounds of actual cooking and the soft melodies that Alyssa hummed while she worked. He told himself he was simply monitoring Nathan's progress, but the truth was more complicated. For the first time in 8 months, his house felt like a home instead of a medical facility. "Dad," Nathan had said that morning during breakfast, the word still startling Leonard every time he heard it. "Alyssa makes pancakes like Mom did." It was the first time Nathan had mentioned his mother since the accident, and Leonard had to excuse himself to the bathroom to compose himself. His son was remembering things worth living for. But Leonard's business empire still demanded his attention, and that afternoon he found himself rushing back from a delayed meeting in downtown Atlanta, frustrated by traffic and a real estate deal that was falling apart. He parked in the circular driveway and strode toward the front door, his mind already focused on damage control and conference calls. That's when he heard it. Music, not Alyssa's usual soft humming, but actual music playing from somewhere inside the house. And over it, the sound of laughter, genuine, joyful laughter, that he recognized with a shock that made him stop dead in his tracks. Nathan was laughing. Leonard followed the sound through the marble foyer, past the formal dining room, toward the kitchen. The music grew louder, an old Motown song, something with a rhythm that seemed to pulse through the walls. And there was that laughter again, bright and clear and impossible. He approached the kitchen doorway and stopped, his briefcase falling from his hand to clatter on the marble floor. In the center of the kitchen, Alyssa was dancing with Nathan. She had somehow maneuvered his wheelchair next to the kitchen island and had wrapped a soft kitchen towel around his torso, creating a makeshift support that held him upright against her. Nathan's arms hung loosely at his sides, but his head was lifted, and he was smiling, actually smiling, as Alyssa swayed them both gently to the music. "See," Alyssa was saying, her voice mixing with the melody, "this is how you danced at your 8th grade formal, isn't it? Just like this, nice and slow, letting the music tell your body what to do." Nathan's voice was weak but audible. "I was scared at that dance." "Scared? A handsome boy like you? What were you scared of?" Stepping on her feet, Alyssa laughed, a sound like silver bells. "Well, you don't have to worry about that now, do you? Sometimes our limitations become our freedom." Leonard stood frozen in the doorway, watching his paralyzed son sway to music in the arms of a woman he'd hired to cook meals. Part of him was terrified. What if Nathan fell? What if this movement damaged his spine further? What if... But Nathan was laughing again, and Leonard realized he hadn't heard that sound since before the accident. For 8 months, he'd been so focused on what Nathan couldn't do that he'd forgotten to consider what Nathan might still be able to feel. Again, Nathan whispered as the song ended. "Please. Are you sure, baby? We don't want to tire you out." Again, Alyssa reached over to restart the song, adjusting her grip to make sure Nathan was secure. As the music began again, she started humming along, and Nathan closed his eyes, losing himself in the rhythm and the warmth of human contact that wasn't medical or necessary, but purely joyful. That's when Leonard stepped into the kitchen. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" His voice cut through the music like a blade, and Alyssa immediately stopped moving, her hands tightening protectively around Nathan. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, her voice steady despite the obvious surprise. "Nathan was telling me about..." "I can see what Nathan was telling you," Leonard interrupted, his business mode authority taking over. "What I want to know is what you think gives you the right to put my son at risk with this nonsense." Nathan's smile faded, replaced by the familiar blank expression that Leonard had hoped was disappearing forever. "Dad." "Nathan, be quiet," Leonard snapped, then immediately regretted his tone, but his fear was overwhelming his reason. "Alyssa, help him back into his wheelchair. Now." "Mr. Whitmore, I was very careful." Nathan was fully supported, and we were just... "You were dancing with my paralyzed son like he was some kind of prop in your personal entertainment." Leonard's voice rose with each word. "Do you have any medical training? Any understanding of spinal injury protocols? Any idea what could happen if you drop him or move him wrong?" Alyssa carefully helped Nathan back into his wheelchair, making sure he was comfortable and secure. Her movements were gentle and practiced, Leonard noticed, despite his anger. "I understand your concern," she said quietly, "but Nathan wasn't in any danger. I've been working with my brother Marcus for years, and I know how to..." "Your brother isn't my son," Leonard exploded. "Your brother isn't worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Your brother isn't my entire world." The words hung in the air like poison. Nathan was looking between his father and Alyssa with an expression of growing distress, and Leonard realized that his outburst was undoing weeks of progress. But he couldn't stop himself. 8 months of terror and helplessness were pouring out, and Alyssa had become the target for all his frustrated rage. "I hired you to cook meals," he continued, his voice deadly quiet now. "Not to play therapist, not to make medical decisions, and certainly not to treat my son like he's some kind of dance partner in your personal fantasy." "Dad, please," Nathan said, his voice stronger than Leonard had heard it in months. "She wasn't. She didn't." "Nathan, you don't understand the risks involved here. Alyssa clearly doesn't either." Alyssa stood straight, meeting Leonard's angry gaze with quiet dignity. "Mr. Whitmore, I would never do anything to harm Nathan. Everything I do with him is because I believe." "You believe?" Leonard laughed bitterly. "What you believe is irrelevant. This is my house, my son, and my decision. And I'm telling you right now that this kind of behavior stops immediately." "What kind of behavior?" Nathan asked, and Leonard was startled by the challenge in his son's voice. "Being happy, remembering what it feels like to be alive." "Nathan." "No, Dad. For the first time in months, I felt like myself again. For the first time since the accident, I remembered what it was like to be 17 instead of just broken." Leonard felt the words hit him like physical blows. "Son, I'm trying to protect you." "From what? From feeling good? From laughing? From remembering that I'm still here?" Nathan turned his wheelchair toward Alyssa, who was standing quietly with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," he said simply, "for helping me remember." "You're welcome, Nathan," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. Leonard looked between his son and the woman who had somehow reached him when no one else could. He was caught between his terror of losing Nathan and his desperate desire to see his son truly alive again. "Alyssa," he said finally, his voice carefully controlled, "I think it would be best if you focused on your assigned duties from now on. Cooking, nothing else." "I understand, Mr. Whitmore." "Good. Nathan, it's time for your afternoon therapy session." As Leonard wheeled Nathan out of the kitchen, he heard his son say quietly, "Dad, she was helping me. She was putting you at risk." "No," Nathan said with more conviction than Leonard had heard from him since the accident. "She was reminding me why I want to get better. That evening, Leonard stood in his study with a glass of scotch, staring out at the gardens where Nathan used to play basketball until dark. The house felt different again, not warmer this time, but tenser, like the moment before a storm breaks. Mrs. Henderson knocked on his door. "Mr. Whitmore, may I speak with you?" "Come in." "Sir, I know it's not my place, but I was in the kitchen this afternoon when you found Nathan and Alyssa." Leonard braced himself for another lecture about understanding and patience. "Nathan asked me to give you this," Mrs. Henderson said, holding out a piece of paper. Leonard unfolded it to find a note written in Nathan's shaky handwriting. "Dad, today I felt like dancing. I haven't felt like dancing since Mom died. Please don't take that away from me." Leonard sank into his chair, the note trembling in his hands. For 8 months, he'd been so focused on keeping Nathan safe that he'd forgotten the difference between surviving and living. He'd been so afraid of losing his son that he'd been willing to accept a life that wasn't really life at all. But watching Nathan sway to music in Alyssa's arms, seeing that genuine smile on his face, hearing him laugh with pure joy, that had been more alive than Nathan had been since the accident. The question Leonard faced now was whether his fear was stronger than his love, whether his need to control was more important than Nathan's need to heal, and whether he had the courage to let someone else help his son in ways that he couldn't. Outside his window, the sun was setting over the gardens where a boy used to dream of playing professional basketball. Inside the house, that same boy was discovering that there were other kinds of dreams worth pursuing, other ways to move through the world with grace and purpose. But first, his father had to decide whether to let him dance. Leonard Whitmore didn't sleep that night. He sat in his study until dawn, reading and rereading Nathan's note. "Today I felt like dancing. I haven't felt like dancing since Mom died. Please don't take that away from me." By morning, he had made a decision that went against every protective instinct he possessed. When Alyssa arrived for work, she found Leonard waiting in the kitchen, still wearing yesterday's clothes, his hair disheveled and his eyes red with exhaustion and emotion. "Mr. Whitmore," she said carefully, "is everything all right?" Leonard stood up, holding Nathan's note in his trembling hands. "Alyssa, I owe you an apology and an explanation." She set down her bag and waited, sensing that something fundamental was about to change. "8 months ago, I lost my son," Leonard began, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not to death, but to something worse, to emptiness. And yesterday, for the first time since the accident, I saw him truly alive again. I saw him happy." He paused, struggling with words that had been locked inside him for months. "But instead of being grateful, I was terrified. Because if Nathan can feel joy, he can also feel pain. If he can hope, he can also be disappointed. If he can love life again, he can also lose it again." Alyssa listened with the patience of someone who understood that healing often required the wounded to speak their deepest fears aloud. "My wife died when Nathan was 12, Leonard continued. "Cancer. I watched her fight for 2 years, watched her hope and suffer and hope again, until hope became cruel. When she died, I promised myself I would never let Nathan go through that kind of pain. I would protect him from everything that could hurt him." "Including joy?" Alyssa asked gently. "Including disappointment? Including false hope? Including—" Leonard's voice broke. "Including the risk of caring so much about life that losing it becomes unbearable." Alyssa moved closer, her own eyes filling with tears. "Mr. Whitmore, may I tell you something my grandmother told me when my brother was diagnosed?" Leonard nodded. She said, "Baby, you can't protect someone from living. And a life without risk isn't really life at all. It's just existing." She said that love doesn't mean keeping someone safe from everything. Love means giving them reasons to be brave. The words hit Leonard like a revelation. For 8 months, he'd been so focused on protecting Nathan from further harm that he'd protected him from healing as well. "I want to ask something of you," Leonard said, his voice stronger now. "I want you to help my son remember how to live. Not just survive, but really live. Whatever that takes, whatever risks are involved, whatever it costs. Mr. Whitmore, call me Leonard, and I want you to know that if you can give Nathan back his joy, his hope, his belief that life is worth fighting for, then you'll have given me the greatest gift anyone has ever given me." Over the following weeks, Leonard began to see his son through new eyes. Instead of focusing on Nathan's limitations, he started noticing his possibilities. Instead of watching for signs of medical crisis, he started looking for moments of genuine happiness. Alyssa worked with Nathan every day, not just in the kitchen but throughout the house. She brought music into his physical therapy sessions, turning painful exercises into dance movements. She encouraged him to help with cooking, finding ways for him to contribute despite his limited mobility. Most importantly, she treated him like a 17-year-old boy with dreams and opinions and a future worth pursuing. "What do you want to do when you're better?" she asked one afternoon as they worked together to prepare dinner. "Better," Nathan replied, stirring a pot of soup with careful movements. "I'm never going to walk again, Alyssa." "I didn't ask if you were going to walk. I asked what you want to do." Nathan was quiet for a long moment. "I used to want to play basketball in college. And now?" "Now I don't know. What can I do from a wheelchair?" Alyssa smiled. "Baby, you can do almost anything from a wheelchair. You can go to college, have a career, travel the world, fall in love, get married, have children. You can teach other kids that their worth isn't determined by what their bodies can do." "You really believe that?" "I know it. My brother Marcus graduates from Georgia Tech next month with a degree in engineering. He's already got 3 job offers. Being in a wheelchair didn't stop him from building his dreams. It just made him more creative about how to reach them." That night, Nathan asked his father to come to his room after dinner. "Dad, I want to go back to school." Leonard felt his protective instincts flare immediately. "Nathan, I don't think you're ready for." "I'm ready to try," Nathan interrupted. "I'm ready to stop hiding in this house like I'm already dead." Leonard looked at his son, really looked at him, and saw something that had been missing for 8 months. Nathan's eyes were bright with determination, his voice strong with purpose. This wasn't the broken boy who had stopped caring about living. This was his son, fighting his way back to life. "If that's what you want, we'll make it happen," Leonard said. "Whatever support you need, whatever accommodations, whatever it takes. I want Alyssa to help me get ready. She understands how to make impossible things possible." 3 months later, Nathan returned to high school. It wasn't easy. There were difficult days, moments of frustration and setback. But with Alyssa's encouragement and Leonard's support, Nathan discovered that his wheelchair didn't define his limitations. His determination did. He joined the school's debate team, discovered a talent for writing, and even started a support group for other students dealing with disabilities or chronic illnesses. The boy who had once given up on life became someone who helped others find reasons to keep living. Leonard watched this transformation with amazement and gratitude. But he also began to notice something else: the way Alyssa's face lit up when Nathan achieved a new milestone, the way she celebrated his victories as if they were her own, the way she had become not just Nathan's caregiver but a vital part of their family. One evening, as Leonard stood in the kitchen doorway watching Alyssa teach Nathan to make his mother's banana pancakes, he realized that his feelings for this remarkable woman had grown beyond professional appreciation. "Alyssa," he said after Nathan had gone to bed, "may I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "Why did you stay? After that day when I was so awful to you, when I questioned your judgment and treated you like you didn't matter, why didn't you leave?" Alyssa smiled, that warm expression that had brought light back into his house. "Because Nathan needed me, and because I could see that underneath all that anger and fear, you needed me too." I do." Leonard moved closer, his heart racing with nervousness he hadn't felt since he was a teenager. "Alyssa, these past months, watching you with Nathan, seeing how you've brought life back into this house, I've realized something." "What's that?" "I've fallen in love with you, not just because of what you've done for Nathan, but because of who you are, your kindness, your wisdom, your faith in things that seem impossible. You've healed my son, but you've also healed me." Alyssa's eyes filled with tears. "Leonard, I love you too. Both of you. You've become my family." That Christmas, Leonard proposed to Alyssa during a dinner that Nathan had helped prepare. The ring was a family heirloom that had belonged to Leonard's grandmother, but the proposal was uniquely theirs, surrounded by the warmth of their kitchen, with music playing softly in the background and the smell of home-cooked food filling the air. "Yes," Alyssa said through happy tears. "Yes, to all of it. To this life, to this family, to this love." Nathan cheered from his wheelchair, clapping with hands that were growing stronger every day through physical therapy that he now embraced instead of endured. 6 months later, they were married in the garden behind the mansion, with Nathan serving as Leonard's best man. The ceremony was small but full of joy. Mrs. Henderson cried through the entire service, and even Dr. Reeves, Nathan's neurologist, attended to witness the miracle he'd helped document. In his speech at the reception, Nathan said, Alyssa taught me that healing isn't about going back to who you were before you got hurt. It's about becoming someone stronger, someone who can help other people heal too. 5 years later, Leonard stood in that same garden, watching his wife teach their 3-year-old daughter how to dance while Nathan, now a college senior studying social work, provided musical accompaniment from his electric keyboard. Nathan had regained some use of his arms and hands through years of determined therapy, enough to pursue his passion for music and his calling to help others. The Whitmore Foundation, established in memory of Nathan's mother and administered jointly by Leonard and Alyssa, had become one of the Southeast's leading organizations supporting families dealing with spinal cord injuries and other disabilities. Nathan served as the foundation's youth coordinator, proving every day that limitations were often just starting points for discovering new possibilities. "Daddy, look," their daughter called, spinning in circles with Alyssa's guidance. "I'm dancing like Nathan taught me." Leonard smiled, remembering the day he'd found Nathan and Alyssa dancing in the kitchen, the day he'd almost let fear destroy the miracle that was trying to unfold in his house. He'd learned that love wasn't about protecting someone from all risk. It was about giving them the courage to face whatever came with the knowledge that they weren't facing it alone. "That's beautiful, sweetheart," he called back. "Keep dancing." As the music played and his family moved together in the golden light of a Georgia sunset, Leonard Whitmore understood that the greatest fortune he'd ever acquired wasn't measured in dollars or properties or business deals. It was measured in moments like this, in laughter that filled empty spaces, in hope that conquered fear, and in the miraculous transformation that occurs when love is allowed to work its magic. Alyssa had arrived at his house carrying nothing but faith and a warm smile. She had stayed to prove that sometimes the most powerful medicine isn't found in any hospital or prescribed by any doctor. Sometimes healing comes disguised as a woman humming gospel songs while she cooks, believing with absolute certainty that broken things can be made whole again, that lost souls can find their way home, and that love really can conquer anything, even the fear of living. The END, a story about the courage to love despite the risk of loss, about finding healing in unexpected places, and about discovering that the most powerful miracles happen when we open our hearts to the possibility that life can be beautiful again. Because sometimes the greatest strength comes not from protecting ourselves from pain, but from having the faith to dance anyway.